3 weeks into this war, and much of the US rhetoric points to a worrying lack of regard for human life and rules of engagement, including Pete Hegseth's pledge of no quarter, no mercy for our enemies. This implies enemy combatants would be executed rather than taken prisoner. That would be a war crime. And lest we forget that alleged US strike on a school on day one of this war in Iran, at least 168 children were killed. Horrifying images of little school bags bloodstained amongst the rubble. Not too long ago, the Pentagon seemed serious about reducing harm to innocents, setting up a civilian protection center of excellence, as they called it. That was until it was dissolved last year under Trump and Hegseth. Air Force combat veteran Wes Bryant was a senior advisor before he was forced out in government cuts. And he joined me from Raleigh in North Carolina to explain the perils. Wes Bryant, welcome to our program.
Thanks for having me.
Can I first start by asking you, since you are former Air Force, how do you assess this now 3 weeks of US and Israeli bombing of Iran and their mission to either topple the government or severely and utterly cripple any kind of offensive capability it might have?
Well, this is another inception, another carrying out of illegal use of military force on part of the Trump administration. It's illegal per UN charter, per international law, per even US law and mandate. And really, all Trump is doing here is completely destabilizing the Middle East, creating, Iran, of course, has been our enemy for decades in many aspects. We're certainly not going to get Iran to submit, and they're certainly not going to be our friend anytime soon in the next few generations. And now we have regional war, essentially, in the Middle East.
Listen, your speciality is international law, civilian targets. You had, a bureau to deal with that. And then it was essentially, you were specifically tasked with reducing civilian harm. What do you make of the way this is unfolding? Because not only did we see the girls' school targeted, hit, but now we're seeing, certainly from reports from the inside, more and more civilian targets either targeted or caught in the blast. What do you think about how that's going?
Yes, exactly. And that's the key here, is not just this tragedy against the girls' school, but how many more cases are there? And there's likely a lot. My colleagues at Air Wars are tracking upwards of 80 separate incidents so far between US and Israeli strikes of civilian casualty instances. And, we're tracking upwards of 1,800 civilian casualties so far, and that number will very likely rise. I find this shameful, frankly. Let's go to the girls, the example with the strike on the girls' school. Shameful that our administration, our Secretary of Defense, or War as he calls himself, and our senior military leadership can't even to this day acknowledge that they actually struck the school, let alone provide some kind of half semblance of an apology and then address the situation appropriately. But for our own Secretary of Defense and commanders to not even be able to tell the American people where they've dropped their own bombs and missiles, that's a problem in and of itself. And then we have the problem of just the sheer recklessness and bloodthirst of this campaign. And we're joining with Israel, who has been committing genocide in Gaza. We are essentially, what I see now, the horrifying aspect of this is that we're importing, in the US military, importing the standards that Israel has created in the war in Gaza of utter recklessness in targeting, blatant disregard for international law, and an incredibly high tolerance for civilian casualties, and brushing them off, saying things like, civilian casualties will happen in war. The enemy embeds in urban areas, and no other military takes as much care to prevent civilian casualties.
Well, both have said that.
These sound exactly like what Netanyahu's been saying for years.
Well, he's saying that now about the Iran, we're the most moral army in the world. And not only that, the Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, has also said that. I am going to play a little bit of a soundbite that he said from the Pentagon podium. Take a listen.
No nation takes more precautions to ensure there's never targeting of civilians than the United States of America. From the boat strikes in the Caribbean, where every single strike is assessed to this campaign here, no nation in the history of warfare has ever attempted in every way possible to avoid civilian casualties.
Wes, is that true? And I am surprised that he brings up the boats, because so many said that those were not legitimate targets in terms of warriors. There just wasn't enough evidence to prove that they were, warriors, so to speak.
Exactly. It's almost laughable if it wasn't so enraging. These boat strikes on so-called narco-terrorists, that was a summary execution. That was murder, even if they're drug smugglers. Completely illegal per U.S. and international law. And, to go back, again, Hegseth sounds exactly like what Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government have been saying for years in their war in Gaza in response to the genocide and the war in Gaza, that no other nation takes as much precautions. Yes, I can attest. I carried out strike campaigns and strikes for over 2 decades in the war on terror. I can attest that, yes, we have a lot of precautions built in, but we've also made a lot of mistakes and continue to make a lot of mistakes. And that is why the civilian harm mitigation and response enterprise was established under Secretary Austin, under the Biden administration, in which Hegseth came in and completely slashed under the construct of, woke. It's not fitting with his concept of lethality and killing, right? So I would argue that if we are so good at protecting civilians, how did we just kill nearly 200 young schoolgirls in Iran? And how have we not even acknowledged that that's the case?
So, Wes, tell me, how could it be possible? Because I've heard and read separate things, either that it was, targeted or it was crossfire, but more likely that it was based on a 10-year-old map and coordinates of what that area was that they were going after, apparently military targets. So do you know about that?
Yes, I've been doing analysis of this strike, since it happened. And from all of the evidence we have so far, and really this is what struck me when I first looked at this strike, the day all this information came out, was that we have a case of misidentification where this entire naval compound, this Iranian naval compound, which was a missile headquarters, was targeted, 7 to 9 buildings within this compound. I would add within that compound a Iranian Navy medical facility that's also protected per international law. That was targeted. And then the school adjacent to the facility. Now, if you look at old imagery, over 10 years old, that what is now a school that was struck was not separated from the rest of the compound, appeared to be a part of the compound, and was not listed anywhere online digitally as a school. Well, as of 2016 to 2020, we have a wall separating the rest of the compound from the school. It's the closest military building to that school is over 100 meters. We have play areas erected, pink and blue walls that we see. And then online, in Iranian digital mapping, it's listed as a school on Google Maps. Online, it's listed as a school. And so what that tells me is that we use somehow, incredibly, over 10-year-old targeting information and map data and didn't verify any of it before targeting. That's actually a fundamental failure in targeting doctrine and standards that we've had for over 2 decades.
So, Wes, are you concerned that this could repeat itself? And do you think that it is repeating itself, that other targets that might be civilian or civilian adjacent, and now we're hearing from Israel that they are not only going to continue their assassination campaign to try to sow chaos, as they say, within the system. So far, it doesn't seem to be happening, but they're going to expand onto what is civilian infrastructure, like the electricity grid and gas, I think, that not the oil industry, but that which is, I guess, designed for internal use. Are those legitimate targets, and are you concerned about that?
I'm incredibly concerned, and this is their playbook. This is their Gaza playbook and their playbook for everywhere else. They're truly Israel, the government of Israel, is conducting itself truly as a rogue state. These are blatant violations of international law, hitting civilian infrastructure en masse as is happening and as they're intending. We also have Israel now targeting, for example, besieged military police forces in the middle of the street, and using low collateral weapons, meaning with small explosives, but they're using them in incredibly dense urban populace. So still exposing the civilian populace to these effects and causing civilian casualties. The same thing they do in Gaza. I'll go back to this notion of precision warfare, which Hegseth, frankly, does not understand. Precision warfare is not using precision munitions to mass bomb urban areas, which is what's happening here.
You said, it's not precision warfare and it's got this fallout. So I want to ask you furthermore then, what you make, and do you think it was loose lips from Hegseth? Do you think he even understood what he was saying when he said we will take no quarter, no mercy for our enemies? What do you understand that to mean? Because Senator Mark Kelly has tweeted, no quarter isn't some wannabe tough guy line. It means something. An order to give no quarter would mean to take no prisoners and kill them instead. That would violate the law of armed conflict. It would be an illegal order. It will also put American service members at greater risk. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree. We have to take a look here and ask ourselves, who are we as a people when we have people like this in extreme positions of power? He sounds and acts maniacal. He has already carried out war crimes and continues to state the intent to carry out war crimes. And that's horrifying.
Well, we will clearly try to get some reaction to that because it is a serious allegation, but others have made that now, and it is very, very concerning. You blew the whistle on the Pentagon for gutting your program, precisely for the reasons and the concerns that you express right now. But even beyond that, the retired general, former Army commander, General Stanley McChrystal, talked about, quote, insurgent math. He said, for every civilian killed, at least 10 new enemies are created. Talk about that for a moment.
When the Trump administration states that part of their mission here, anyway, is to free the oppressed Iranian people, well, killing hundreds, likely thousands of civilians, including, small children, and then on top of that, showing absolutely no remorse for it, doesn't send that message whatsoever. And then what you have is, you're very clearly, you're going to turn the population against the U.S. cause. I mean, put yourself in that situation. If another country came in to remove the Trump administration and bombed your child's school, would you really view them as a liberator? Not at all.
Wes Bryant, thank you very much. I'm just going to finish by saying the Pentagon has said a general officer or a special officer will look into the school attack, and we'll wait and see what they come up with. But thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for having me.